Johnny Carson didn't yell at people he hated. He erased them. For 30 years, America saw the calmest man on television, the perfect timing, the effortless charm, the warm Midwestern smile. But when the cameras stopped rolling, that smile could disappear in seconds. A former director once said Carson touched his ear, the silent signal to cut to commercial, only a handful of times in 3 decades. And every time someone had crossed a line, Carson had rules. The Tonight Show was not a billboard, it was a conversation. There were subjects that were off-limits: his divorces, his children, how much he drank. Violate the rhythm, challenge his control, betray his loyalty. And you wouldn't get a public feud. You would get silence. After retiring in 1992, Carson never explained his grudges. He carried them quietly to the grave. So what could push the most unflappable man in American television to that point? Tonight, we uncover the 6 guests Johnny Carson secretly despised and the private moments that turned professional relationships into permanent exile. The tension that night did not explode in a single dramatic clash. It built slowly, almost imperceptibly, from the moment Madonna walked onto the stage. She was dressed in black lace, deliberately provocative for network television in 1987, fully aware that her image alone would create a contrast against Johnny Carson's controlled, tailored presence. Carson represented polished tradition. Madonna represented disruption. Even before a word was spoken, the generational divide was visible. The interview began playfully enough. Carson asked about her tour, her schedule, her career momentum. Madonna answered with charm, but there was an undercurrent, a teasing sharpness that suggested she was steering toward something else. The shift came when Carson moved into questions about her personal life and the rumors surrounding her relationships. Madonna leaned back casually and delivered a sexual double entendre so explicit that NBC's standards department had to bleep part of it in real time. The audience gasped before laughing, reacting not just to the joke, but to the audacity. Carson blinked, paused, and gave a tight smile. That pause, barely a second, revealed that control had slipped, even if only slightly. Carson attempted to reset the rhythm. He shifted to safer territory, asking about her work ethic and creative discipline. Madonna refused to settle. She interrupted with another layered innuendo, slower this time, making sure the audience caught every implication. Another bleep, another roar of laughter. Carson adjusted in his chair. His expression remained pleasant, but the effort was visible. For a man whose power came from controlling tempo and tone, Madonna was disrupting both. At one point, after she implied she was very good in bed, Carson responded with a line that sounded like humor but carried a clear boundary. "Do you kiss your mother with that mouth?" The audience laughed again, but the subtext was unmistakable. It was a warning disguised as a joke, an attempt to reclaim authority without breaking composure. Madonna smiled and leaned closer, doubling down instead of retreating. She implied she could shock him further if she chose to, turning censorship itself into part of her performance. Every bleep became a badge of rebellion. Every awkward pause became proof she had pushed the format further than it was built to go. There was no shouting, no visible hostility. But there was a subtle power struggle unfolding in real time. Carson tried repeatedly to guide the interview back to neutral ground: music, touring, career plans. Madonna reframed neutral questions into provocative territory. When he used light sarcasm, she escalated it. When he tried to soften the tone, she sharpened it. The audience sensed it, too. Laughter mixed with a layer of tension rarely felt on The Tonight Show. The most uncomfortable moment came when Madonna suggested Carson might be obsessed with her, blurring flirtation with generational discomfort. The crowd laughed, but the atmosphere tightened. Carson smiled thinner now and moved on. The professionalism never cracked. The mask never fully slipped, but the control had been challenged. There was no backstage explosion afterward, no dramatic confrontation. But Madonna was never invited back, and that silence may have been the clearest response of all. She hadn't insulted him, threatened him, or betrayed him. What she had done was more unsettling. She had exposed the limits of his format, live in front of millions, and proved that the old rules could be bent. For a man whose empire was built on invisible control and emotional restraint, that moment may have felt more destabilizing than any personal attack ever could. If Joan Rivers' conflict with Carson was silent and surgical, Wayne Newton's was direct and physical in tone. For years, Carson had included Newton in his monologue rotation, joking about his high-pitched voice and polished Vegas persona. The jokes were not uniquely cruel. Similar barbs had been aimed at Liberace, Tiny Tim, and countless other performers. In the ecosystem of late-night television, teasing was a form of currency. You endured it, you laughed along, you returned to promote your next project. The rhythm continued. Wayne Newton did not treat it that way. When Newton appeared on The Tonight Show in 1981, viewers sensed a faint stiffness in the exchange, but nothing explosive. Carson remained controlled, smiling, professional. Newton answered questions. The interview ended without incident. The real confrontation happened when the cameras were off. During a commercial break, Newton leaned forward and requested a private conversation after taping. Those nearby later described a perceptible shift in the room, not loud, not dramatic, but charged. Staff members could feel that this would not be routine post-show small talk. After the taping concluded, Newton followed Carson into his office. Multiple accounts from production staff described the discussion as calm in tone but unmistakably confrontational. Newton reportedly told Carson that the jokes questioning his masculinity needed to stop immediately and permanently. He reminded Carson that Las Vegas was his territory. Carson performed there, but Newton held influence there. The message was layered, but the implication was clear. There were consequences beyond television. Then came the line that stunned those who later heard about it. Newton allegedly said something to the effect of, "You wouldn't think I was so feminine if I grabbed you by the throat right now." It was not shouted. It was not theatrical. It was delivered close, personal, and controlled, which made it more unsettling. This was no longer satire, no longer the language of comedy. It was the suggestion of physical force. Carson had served in the Navy. He was not known to be easily intimidated, but insiders later said he walked out of that room visibly shaken not in fear, but in disbelief. In Carson's world, the stage belonged to him. Monologue jokes were part of the structure. Guests might bristle privately, but they did not challenge the host's authority face to face. What unsettled Carson was not merely the threat, but the breach of an unspoken rule. The arena was his. There was no public retaliation. Carson did not escalate the situation in the press. He did not deliver harsher jokes the following night. He did not perform outrage. Instead, he did something colder. Newton effectively disappeared from the show. Invitations stopped. The door closed without announcement. Privately, friends later recalled that if Newton appeared on television while Carson was watching at home, Carson would immediately change the channel and mutter something dismissive about Vegas tough guys. It was not fear that lingered. It was contempt. The conflict with Wayne Newton was different from betrayal, chaos, or provocation. It was a challenge. An attempt, however, brief to shift power inside Carson's own domain. Carson could tolerate ego. He could tolerate scandal. He could tolerate manipulation. What he would not tolerate was intimidation. From that night forward, Wayne Newton was no longer a punchline. He was a boundary crossed and a door permanently shut. Shelley Winters did not threaten Carson. She did something far more destabilizing. She ignored the format. Winters was a two-time Academy Award winner, larger than life, both on and off screen. When she appeared on The Tonight Show, she did not treat it like an interview. She treated it like a stage with no script. From the moment she sat down, the rhythm Carson carefully built began to slip. She interrupted questions mid-sentence, redirected topics toward herself, and expanded minor prompts into sprawling, emotional monologues that stretched far beyond timing cues. Carson's power as a host depended on control of tempo. Winters dismantled tempo. One particularly infamous appearance became the breaking point. During a discussion about aging actresses in Hollywood, another guest made what Winters perceived as a dismissive remark. Instead of deflecting it with humor, she escalated. Her voice rose. She leaned forward aggressively. Then, in a moment that stunned both the audience and production staff, she threw a drink across the couch toward the other guest. The studio erupted not in laughter, but in shock. Carson's reaction was subtle but telling. He did not yell, he did not scold her. He leaned back, tightened his jaw, and attempted to redirect the segment with a joke. But insiders later said that behind the desk, his irritation was unmistakable. The Tonight Show was not supposed to become a battleground. It was structured spontaneity, not emotional eruption. The chaos did not end there. Winters reportedly spoke over Carson repeatedly, ignored commercial break signals, and at times physically shifted in her seat in ways that forced camera operators to scramble to reframe shots. Production assistants later described her as impossible to contain. For Carson, who prized smooth execution, this was not eccentric charm, it was disorder. What angered him more than the on-air unpredictability, however, was what happened off-camera. According to multiple accounts, Winters had a reputation for being dismissive and, at times, demeaning toward younger staff members, particularly female production assistants. Carson had a clear rule. Guests could test him, but they could not disrespect his crew. When he learned that Winters had spoken harshly to a young staffer backstage, that crossed a personal boundary. After the drink-throwing incident, Carson reportedly told staff, "No more Shelley." It was not delivered dramatically. It was a quiet conclusion. Winters was not formally banned, her star power made that complicated, but her appearances became rarer, more tightly controlled, and often isolated into solo segments to minimize risk. So what truly triggered Carson's private disdain? Was it the thrown drink, the disregard for format, or the sense that his show had briefly slipped beyond his control? Carson could tolerate strong personalities. He could even tolerate calculated provocation. What he could not tolerate was chaos that affected others or undermined the structure he spent decades perfecting. Shelley Winters did not attack Carson. She attacked the rhythm. And for Johnny Carson, rhythm was everything. Unlike the others, Don Rickles was not an enemy. He was a friend. And that made crossing the line far more complicated. Rickles built his entire career on insult comedy. No one was safe, not politicians, not celebrities, not audience members, and certainly not the host. When Rickles sat on Carson's couch, viewers expected sparks. The tension was part of the appeal. Carson, master of timing, would lean back and let Rickles fire off rapid insults, occasionally responding with a dry, surgical comeback. It was electric television, but even electricity has limits. Carson had boundaries few people fully understood. There were 3 areas he considered untouchable: his divorces, his children, and his drinking. He guarded those subjects fiercely. He rarely discussed them publicly and never invited them into comedy. Rickles, however, operated by a different code. During one appearance in the 1970s, he began joking about Carson's recent divorce settlement, implying financial humiliation. Then, he pivoted into pointed remarks about Carson's drinking habits. The audience roared. On camera, Carson smiled. During the commercial break, the smile faded. According to a director present that night, Carson turned to Rickles and said quietly, "That wasn't funny, Don. That was mean." It was one of the rare moments Carson confronted a guest directly. Those who knew him said the temperature in the studio changed immediately. The professionalism remained. The jokes resumed when cameras returned. But something had shifted. The rupture deepened during another incident when Rickles arranged what he intended as a surprise tribute to Carson, complete with embarrassing photos and old stories displayed without prior approval. What Rickles thought would be hilarious felt to Carson like an ambush. He valued control over his image above almost everything else. And here was a friend stripping that control away for a punchline. So why wasn't Rickles erased like others? Because he apologized. Rickles reportedly acknowledged that he had gone too far, not defensively, not dismissively. He recognized the difference between sharp humor and personal wound. Carson, who rarely accepted apologies once he felt betrayed, made an exception. Those close to him believed it came down to intent. Rickles' aim was laughter, not power. He wasn't trying to dethrone Carson, threaten him, or expose him. He simply misjudged the line. But that raises a question. Did Carson forgive Rickles because of friendship or because Rickles never challenged his authority? Rickles teased the king, but he never tried to take the throne. Carson could endure ego. He could endure chaos. He could endure provocation. What he could not endure was a loss of control. Rickles flirted with that loss and barely escaped it. In Carson's world, forgiveness was rare. Rickles earned it. Most others did not. If Don Rickles flirted with the line between humor and cruelty, Truman Capote blurred the line between brilliance and liability. Capote was not merely a celebrity guest. He was literary royalty, the author of In Cold Blood, and a confidant to socialites, politicians, and Hollywood elites. He possessed something uniquely dangerous for live television: secrets. For years, his appearances on The Tonight Show were captivating. He could be charming, razor-sharp, unpredictable in the best way. Carson appreciated intelligence. He appreciated verbal precision. In Capote, he had both. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, something had changed. Capote's struggles with alcohol and drugs became increasingly visible. His once controlled wit grew erratic. Stories wandered. Filters thinned. What had once been delicious gossip edged closer to revelation. And in live television, revelation carries consequences. During one particularly tense taping, Capote began describing in explicit detail a sexual encounter involving a prominent political couple. At first, Carson allowed it to continue, perhaps assuming it would circle back to metaphor or humor. But about 30 seconds in, it became clear this was not playful insinuation. This was potentially actionable territory. Carson cut to commercial. According to those present, the decision was immediate. Standards and legal departments were already uneasy about Capote's unpredictability. The delay button could only do so much. Afterward, Carson reportedly told a producer, "We're not doing this anymore. It's not good for him. And it's not good television." That statement carried two layers. The first was practical. The Tonight Show could not become a vehicle for exposing private lives in ways that invited lawsuits. Carson had spent decades building a structure of controlled spontaneity. Capote's unraveling threatened that structure. But the second layer was more complicated. Capote had already alienated much of New York's elite by publishing thinly veiled fictional accounts of their private scandals. Many former friends turned their backs on him. What appeared on Carson's couch was not just eccentricity, it was decline. And decline, when televised, becomes spectacle. Was Carson protecting the show or protecting Capote from humiliating himself further on national television? Carson valued control above almost everything else. He valued dignity, too, at least the kind that preserved the illusion of composure. Watching a once brilliant mind disintegrate under studio lights forced him into an uncomfortable position. Continue booking a genius at the cost of exploiting his deterioration, or remove him and accept the loss of unpredictable brilliance. Carson chose removal. Capote was not banned in anger. He faded from the booking list. The chaos was deemed too risky. In Carson's world, intelligence was welcome. Instability was not. So where was the real line crossed? In the scandalous content? In the loss of self-control? Or in the reminder that even brilliance, unchecked, could unravel live in front of millions? For a man who built his empire on precision timing and emotional restraint, Truman Capote represented the opposite: exposure without control. And that was something Carson would never allow to define his stage. The most devastating fracture in Johnny Carson's career did not happen on camera. It happened in silence. Joan Rivers had once been more than a frequent guest. She was his protégé, the comedian he championed when others hesitated. After her first appearance in 1965, Carson recognized something electric in her timing and fearlessness. Over the next 2 decades, he didn't just book her, he elevated her. He defended her edgier material to network executives, encouraged her growth, and eventually gave her the most coveted seat in late-night television, permanent guest host of The Tonight Show. In an industry built on competition, that level of endorsement was rare. Carson did not invest personally in many careers. With Rivers, he did, which is why what happened in 1986 cut so deeply. Rivers accepted an offer to host a competing late-night program on the Fox network, and Carson learned about it not from her, but from a press release. To him, it wasn't merely professional ambition, it was betrayal. According to multiple accounts, Rivers tried to reach him before the announcement but couldn't get through. She later sent letters, she attempted phone calls, she sought reconciliation through mutual friends. Carson refused every attempt. "Don't ever mention her name in my presence," he reportedly told staff, not in anger, but in a cold, matter-of-fact tone. And from that moment forward, Joan Rivers effectively ceased to exist in his world. The punishment was absolute. Carson never publicly attacked her, never gave interviews condemning her decision, never staged a counter-narrative. He simply erased her. Even after his retirement in 1992, when most professional rivalries would have cooled with time, he maintained the silence. At one industry event in the mid-1990s where both were present, Carson reportedly turned and walked in the opposite direction when an introduction was attempted. The room, witnesses said, froze instantly. For a man who valued loyalty above nearly everything else, Rivers had crossed a boundary that could not be repaired. But was it only about loyalty? Or was there something deeper at play? Carson held significant influence at NBC, including a voice in Succession discussions. Some insiders believed he was sensitive about the future of late night and about control over his domain. If Rivers' move felt like competition, it may also have felt like loss of authority. Others have speculated that Carson, who was intensely private and emotionally guarded, experienced the departure not as business, but as personal abandonment. If Rivers had been a male comedian making the same move, would the reaction have been identical? Or did Carson feel uniquely wounded because she had once occupied a position so close to his own power? Rivers would later speak openly about the rupture, admitting regret and confusion over how completely she had been cut off. Carson never responded. He never explained. And perhaps that is what makes this fracture so haunting. In a world of public confrontations and televised drama, Carson chose something colder than anger. He chose absence, and in doing so, he demonstrated the full force of a man who believed loyalty was not negotiable. For 30 years, Johnny Carson sat behind a desk and made control look effortless. The audience saw the smile, the timing, the warmth. What they did not see was the calculation beneath it, the invisible architecture that held the entire show together. Every pause, every redirect, every raised eyebrow was measured. Carson was not simply hosting a program, he was maintaining a universe with rules. Each of these 6 conflicts revealed a different boundary in that universe. Joan Rivers violated loyalty and discovered that silence can be more permanent than rage. Wayne Newton challenged authority face-to-face and learned that intimidation closes doors quietly. Shelley Winters disrupted rhythm and proved that chaos, even without malice, can destabilize the structure. Don Rickles cut too close to private wounds and glimpsed how laughter can wound more deeply than insult. Truman Capote unraveled live on air, forcing Carson to choose between brilliance and liability. Madonna did not attack Carson personally, she exposed the generational shift that threatened to outgrow the format itself. What binds these stories together is not drama, it is discipline. Carson never erupted publicly. He never staged revenge. He never allowed the audience to witness the fracture. His grudges, when they formed, were quiet and absolute. He believed that the show, the illusion, mattered more than the conflict. In today's world of public feuds and instant outrage, that restraint feels almost foreign. Carson belonged to an era where professionalism meant absorbing discomfort without broadcasting it, where personal betrayal did not become content, where the camera stopped and the emotions stayed behind it. Perhaps that is why these stories endure, not because of the fights themselves, but because of what they reveal about the man who never broke character, even when threatened, even when betrayed, even when mocked or challenged. The smile stayed, the line was crossed, and the door closed,